Welcome to See Crime Stories, true stories of the missing and the pursuit of answers. 5 seconds. That's how long it takes to spot what doesn't fit: a half-used prescription on a nightstand, children's toys where they should be, and a mother who should be there, who isn't. In Girard, Ohio, the absence becomes the first piece of evidence. Charlotte Nagy Paulus, 28, had been treated late on March 11, 1994, for a painful ear infection. She returned home after midnight. By routine, a sick parent stays put: medication, water, and rest. By the afternoon of March 12, her husband said he took the 2 small children out to let her sleep and came back to an empty house. No note. Purse and medication left behind. Law enforcement opened a missing person report, not a homicide. From the start, the file reads clean: no 911 call reporting violence, no broadcast be on the lookout for a suspect vehicle, no verified witness who saw her walk away. What investigators could confirm quickly was limited but important. A narrow window, post-midnight return from care to the morning hours of March 12. A defined location: the family home. A set of personal effects indicating she hadn't prepared to travel. Those details form the baseline. In 1994, with no cell phone pings and little residential surveillance, baseline matters. It's how you decide whether to treat the case as a walkaway, a concealment, or an abduction. Family members later pointed out something outside: tracks in the snow headed toward a backyard shed. That observation adds a direction of travel but not a destination. It suggests movement near the property line, not proof of who moved or when. Officers note, in cases like this, you separate what is observed from what is concluded. Snow prints are transient, they guide a search but rarely answer it. Inside, scene work focuses on contradictions: open doors or windows, signs of struggle, missing clothing, missing identification, anything that breaks pattern. Here, the early pattern is quiet. Too quiet can mean nothing, or it can mean the opposite: cleaned, staged, or simply undisturbed. Without laboratory confirmations released publicly, the file stays in its most restrictive category: missing adult, no body recovered. The first 24 hours established the tone. Detectives canvass neighbors for any late-night sounds, lights, or vehicles. They map Charlotte's last verified actions: medical care, home, phone contact with her mother, rest. The husband's account: took the kids out, returned to an empty house, becomes a time anchor to check against everything else. In any nobody case, the early work is subtraction: remove what cannot be true so what remains is testable. If a mother of 2 left voluntarily while ill, investigators expect to see preparation. If she was taken, they look for transfer marks, trace evidence, and a path of egress. If the departure was concealed, they look for cleaning artifacts, timeline gaps, and statements that shift with pressure. 30 years later, those first pages still frame the problem: no confirmed sighting after the early hours of March 12, 1994, no remains, no charge. The case lives in the tension between an ordinary house and an extraordinary absence. Every missing person file starts with a clock. In this case, the clock narrows fast. After midnight on March 12, 1994, Charlotte Nagy Paulus returns home to Girard, Ohio, following treatment for an ear infection. Within hours, routine contact stops. Morning calls don't connect. By afternoon, her husband reports he took the children out so she could rest and found the house empty when they came back. There is no 911 call for a disturbance, no confirmed sighting of her after the early morning, and no indication she packed to leave. That span, from after midnight to midday, becomes the investigative window that everything else has to fit. Detectives work that window from both ends. On the front end, they confirm the late-night medical visit and her return home. On the back end, they log the first unsuccessful attempts to reach her and the moment she's reported missing. The immediate question is simple. If a young mother left voluntarily while ill, what would she take, and who would see her? Essentials left behind challenge the walkaway theory. No neighbor steps forward with a verified sighting. No facility records a check-in under her name. In towns like this, people notice who comes and goes. The silence is a data point. Inside the house, the focus is pattern versus break-in pattern. Investigators note visible routine, kids' items where they belong, medication present, nothing obvious to suggest travel. They also mark what isn't present, no forced entry documented in public record, no confirmed signs of struggle released to the public. Without lab reports made available, the interior stays classified as a residence associated with a missing person, not a confirmed crime scene. That classification matters. It sets what can be seized immediately and what requires additional grounds. Outside, family members later point out tracks in the snow heading toward a backyard shed. Officers treat that as an investigative lead, not a conclusion. Tracks can indicate proximity, direction, or recent movement, but not identity. They can be photographed, measured, and compared to shoes available, but melting and foot traffic limit what they prove. The shed itself becomes a point of interest because the path suggests attention to it. Whether it yields evidence is a separate question, and in public materials, there is no disclosure of a decisive find there. The data align too cleanly sometimes. That was the problem. A path to a structure is suggestive. Investigators still need something that ties a person to a time and an act. With no body and no verified departure plan, the team leans on time and place control. Who had access to the house and the window? Who had responsibility for the children? Who can verify movements without relying on one person's statement? In 1994, there are no cell phone pings, limited home surveillance, and far fewer exterior cameras to reconstruct a neighborhood loop. So, canvas work carries more weight, door-to-door checks for sounds in the night, engines idling, a car door closing at an unusual hour. When the canvas produces no clean lead, the working theories get reordered. Walkaway slides down, concealment or removal climbs, but only as a probability. Without remains, probability is all you have. The first day is also when investigators decide how to protect the future case. If there's even a chance this is more than a disappearance, they preserve what they can: photographs, floor diagrams, a record of what objects were where. They collect statements while memories are fresh. They secure the children's welfare. They cross-reference the husband's reported timeline with any independent verification, cash register timestamps if errands were run, a neighbor who remembers the kids outside, or a relative who got a call. None of that is dramatic, and none of it is optional. Early accuracy prevents later drift. There is a human cost in that accuracy. Families want action that feels like action: search parties, helicopters, breaking news. Investigators know that unstructured activity tramples whatever trace may exist and invites rumor to outrun fact. The balance is to move quickly without contaminating the only scene they have: a quiet house and a short window. When the file later moves to a cold case shelf, that window and those first notes are what future teams will inherit. So the operational picture at the end of day one is clear and constrained. Charlotte is last reliably placed at home after medical care in the early hours of March 12, 1994. By afternoon, she is reported missing. There is no confirmed sighting between those markers. Personal effects indicate no planned trip. Tracks toward a shed are observed but unresolved. No public lab results convert the residence into a declared crime scene. The case remains anchored to a narrow span of time and a single address. If you had to commit resources to only one lane in that first 24 hours, interior reprocessing, extended canvas, or expanded property search, where would you put it, and why? The second day shifts from inside the house to the yard. Investigators widen the perimeter, walking a grid behind the residence and along the fence line. Snow helps, it preserves direction better than memory. Family members point out impressions angling from a side entrance toward a detached shed. Officers document what is visible, measure stride, and photograph the sequence before it degrades. Tracks can suggest movement, they cannot assign identity. That's where the work begins. A quick check of the shed is routine in a missing person search. You're looking for signs of recent access, disturbed snow at the door, fresh tool marks, objects moved off their usual shelf. If a lock is present, the question is simple: who holds the key, who used it recently, and can consent be obtained? If consent isn't granted, investigators note the refusal and move up the ladder for a warrant if probable cause exists. In 1994, with a case that is still formally missing, that threshold is hard to cross without corroboration. The file reflects a familiar friction: urgency to clear the outbuilding, limited legal authority to force it. The yard is read the same way a room is read. Where does a footprint begin? Where does it end? How does it intersect with known paths to the driveway and back door? In small-town Ohio, many lots share a boundary with alleys, sheds, or tree lines. Cross-traffic from neighbors, service workers, and kids can muddy the pattern in a single afternoon. What matters is whether any track returns to the house or continues outward to the street. When a track points one way with no return, investigators mark that as a potential exit route, not a conclusion. Inside the shed, if opened, the checklist is straightforward: odors, disturbed soil, recently moved containers, plastic sheeting, cleaning agents out of place. None of those, in isolation, proves a crime. Each item is only relevant if it slots into the timeline from the house. That is the theme of day 2: either the yard connects to the home, or it doesn't. If it doesn't, you're likely dealing with a false lead or older impressions. If it does, you draw a corridor of movement from door to shed to potential vehicle access. The absence of a vehicle imprint in snow doesn't settle it. Tire marks melt faster than footprints in certain conditions. The goal is not to overread the yard, it's to remove ambiguity. Detectives also look for witnesses whose windows face the backyard. You ask the same questions in tight phrasing: time awake, lights on, any engine sounds, any person on foot, any unusual carrying posture. Sometimes the most value comes from negative answers. If a neighbor with a direct view reports a quiet night and no lights, that trims down scenarios that require exterior commotion. For a viewer, that may feel like nothing. For a case, that structure, each didn't see, narrows the methods of disappearance that still fit. The children's schedule matters, too. If they were out of the home during part of the day, that creates unobserved time inside the house. The track to the shed cannot tell you whether a person left under their own power or was moved, only that someone stepped there at some point. The question becomes whether any other data point, phone activity, a neighbor's timeline, work receipts, touches that same window. In 1994, that is manual work: canvass, compare, repeat. The present-day viewer has to remember, there was no smartphone geofence to pull, no doorbell camera to consult. The yard scene stands or falls on human observation and basic documentation. A practical lesson runs through this pass: when evidence is thin, restraint helps. Investigators are careful not to label the shed a scene. They treat it as a location of interest that might shorten the search radius or waste valuable time. Cold cases often hinge on modest artifacts handled correctly. In towns like Girard, people remember who had what key, who borrowed a tool, who shoveled which side path after a storm. That kind of precise local recall is more valuable than speculation. If you lived nearby in March of 1994, that memory, who walked where and when, still matters in 2025. Day 3 is where the file tightens. With the house documented and the yard mapped, the question becomes whether Charlotte's life shows movement after March 12, 1994. When there isn't a body and there isn't a declared crime scene, you work the ledger, everything that should leave a trace if a person chose to start over. Bank activity, payroll, pharmacy refills, medical follow-ups, driver's license inquiries, social security usage, mail forwarding. If any of those blink after the last verified sighting, investigators pivot. If none of them move, the absence itself starts to carry weight. The pharmacy piece matters because we know she was treated late on March 11th for an acute ear infection. Detectives verify the prescription name, dosing schedule, and whether a refill was due. No refill requests, no call to the provider, no pickup under her identifiers. Those are routine checks. They don't prove a crime, they do undercut the idea of a voluntary walkaway while ill. Medical offices confirm whether discharge instructions included a recheck. There's no record of her scheduling one. That's the first real investigative constraint. Health status suggests a need to stay close to care, but the paper trail stops at the front door of the home. Financial checks come next. Investigators pull recent account summaries with consent where available or via subpoena if the status escalates. They look for ATM withdrawals, gas station purchases, motel swipes, and bus or airline charges under her name. In this case, the pattern stays flat. No verified transactions under her identifiers after March 12th. That flattens two competing theories quickly: spontaneous travel or pre-planned exit. You don't reappear in a new town without cash, transport, or a friend's help. And if a friend helped, that friend usually surfaces under pressure. Mail and utilities are another quiet test. A person leaving on purpose tends to forward mail or let a confidant collect it. Someone aiming to vanish will still need identification updates at some point. Postal checks show no official forwarding order. Utility companies report no stop-start pattern that aligns with a relocation in her name. Driver's services don't show new issuance or replacement activity. In 1994, these were slower to verify, but the logic is the same. Life leaves paperwork even when you try not to. Phone records, limited by the era, still help. Landline logs confirm outgoing or incoming calls around the last verified contact with her mother. No follow-on calls from Charlotte's known numbers appear after that. Neighbors are re-interviewed with that window in hand, this time with narrower prompts: lights between 1 a.m. and early morning, any taxi pull-ups, anyone on foot carrying a bag. The goal is not to manufacture a sighting. It's to test whether any outside observation touches the same slice of time. The grid stays blank. All of that reinforces the legal posture that defines cases like this: officially missing, no body recovered, still no probable cause for a homicide warrant. Without a crime scene or a lab confirmation of violence, every invasive step has to be justified by independent indicators. That's why the exterior lead to the shed remains just that, a lead, unless it connects to a measurable change in the timeline. It's also why consent, cooperation, and voluntary interviews matter in the early days. They substitute for authority an investigator doesn't yet have. Families hear this as a stall. It isn't. It's the difference between building a case that holds and one that collapses. If you move too fast without grounds, you get evidence suppressed. If you move too slow, you lose perishable details. Here, the work is measured and methodical. Agents chart the life signals dashboard: money, medicine, movement, and note 3 straight zeros. It's not dramatic, but it's significant. In small towns, People disappear from public view. They don't disappear from records that easily. There's a human line to keep in view. Charlotte is a 28-year-old mother of two, last confirmed inside her home after midnight care for a painful condition. That's not a profile for a clean break. In communities like Girard, families live with that calculation every day. If she could have called, she would have. The job of the narrator is to keep the focus on what's provable and to ask for what's missing. If you lived in that neighborhood in March 1994 and handled mail routes, clinic check-ins, or pharmacy counters, memory still matters. A name, a receipt, a stray notation can give a cold file the one hinge it lacks. No body, no scene, no post-event life signal. That doesn't end the search. It defines where to push next, statements, timelines, and any place where the house and yard can be tied by something more than footprints and snow. The file moves forward when time stops being a guess. Investigators rebuild the first 12 hours after Charlotte returns home, testing each claim against something they can hold: call logs, neighbor observations, work schedules, receipts. In a nobody case, the clock is a witness. If it talks, the rest of the case follows. The last confirmed point remains the post-midnight return from treatment on March 11th into the early a.m. of March 12th, 1994. From there, the day splits into blocks. The morning window is anchored by the husband's account. He let Charlotte rest and took the children out. That statement is mapped against what else can be verified. Detectives note the time his vehicle was likely in motion by speaking with neighbors about engine noise and with anyone who might have seen the car exit the driveway. They document the children's routine stops, if any, store, relative, or workplace, and place those stops on a simple line. A clean line strengthens the claim that the house was empty of everyone but Charlotte for a period. A line with gaps suggests unobserved time that needs a different kind of scrutiny. Phones help, even in 1994. The home line's incoming and outgoing activity around the morning hours is pulled through the carrier. No calls placed by Charlotte after the overnight check-in with her mother. Any incoming rings that went unanswered are logged by time only, not by identity if the technology doesn't support it, but time is enough. If a call hit the house when the husband says he wasn't there, that's neutral. If a call hit and someone picked up, the interview list grows. Nothing shows that kind of pickup. On paper, the house stays quiet. The husband's work obligations are checked next. Employers can confirm arrivals, departures, and whether anyone saw the children during those hours. If a time card exists, its punch time is compared to driving distance back to the residence. Investigators are not building a complicated model, they're asking whether 2 points on a map can be made to fit without bending physics. If the timeline requires speed that doesn't make sense for a small city street grid, the statement gets re-examined. If the times fall into place, attention shifts back to the house. The mother's attempt to reach Charlotte the next morning is a fixed point that matters. Detectives look for any return call from the residence, any message left, any follow-up from the household. There isn't one. That absence is not proof of harm. Sick people sleep through calls. But when paired with the lack of activity in the afternoon and evening, it defines the window in which something changed. By midday, the route of the family car is reconstructed as best as records allow. If there were purchases, they would be visible on an account statement. If cash was used, a clerk might remember the kids. Cash is common in 1994. Memory is not a system. That is why interviews matter. In towns like Girard, the same clerks worked the same counters for years. Detectives asked for a simple recall. Did a parent with 2 small children stop in that day, and at what approximate time? You collect 2 or 3 of those, and the route begins to hold its shape. The afternoon return is where the story turns. The husband reports coming home to an empty house. Officers mark the time he says he re-entered and whether any neighbor noticed movement at the side door or yard around then. If the exterior track toward the shed had been fresh at that hour, someone looking out a window might have seen it being made. No one places a person at that path in real time. The track remains an earlier, undated clue. With the skeleton of the day on paper, detectives press the statements for consistency. They listen for drift. Not contradictions about feelings, those are common, but changes in specifics, which door was used, which errand came first, what time the children ate, who was called and when. The goal is not to catch a misremembered detail. The goal is to identify any claim that can be tested and either supported or removed. The more the day becomes a sequence that other people and records can touch, the smaller the unknown zone gets. The legal posture does not change with this pass. There is no body. There is no declared crime scene. But the timeline work does two important things. First, it confirms the lack of any life signal from Charlotte after the early morning of March 12 lines up with a house that shows no verified activity by her. Second, it isolates the unobserved intervals when someone could have approached or left without being seen. Those intervals are not proof, they are targets. That is where cold case teams return with new tools, new eyes, and sometimes, new courage from people who stayed quiet the first time. There is a human purpose to this kind of precision. Families deserve a clock that makes sense. Viewers do, too. When the minutes are right, speculation has less room to hide. If you lived near that street in 1994 and remember a single detail about a vehicle, a sound, or a side door used at an odd hour, that memory still has value in 2025. Cold cases stall when the evidence runs out. They move again when the toolkit changes. In 1994, investigators in Girard worked with canvases, paper records, and photographs. Today, a revised pass can test the same house and yard with methods that didn't exist then, without rewriting the facts or the law. The aim is simple: add pressure where the timeline is thin and see if the case yields a new hinge. Start with the place everyone knows, the residence. A modern scene team can sweep with portable luminance and high-resolution documentation that detect faint transfer not visible to film cameras of the era. Touch DNA isn't magic, but it can lift skin cell traces from door levers, stair rails, and the inside surfaces of a vehicle that were previously considered clean. If recovered, those traces don't tell a story on their own. Paired with time, they can. If a profile is developed, it is compared against known household members first, then stored properly for any future comparison legally allowed. The point is not to declare a scene, it's to replace guesswork with a fresh, standardized pass. Outside, the yard and outbuilding can be approached with ground-penetrating radar and targeted soil cores. Those tools map disturbances below the surface without turning the property into a dig site. If nothing shows, the file gains confidence. If anomalies appear, they prompt limited excavation under warrant and supervision. Cadaver dogs trained in historical detection can still be productive decades later, particularly along the corridor of concern from the side door to the shed. No single method is decisive. 2 or 3 in agreement justify the next step. Vehicles are different in 2025. Even if a car from 1994 is long gone, trace can survive on items saved from that era: mats, blankets, hand tools. A careful reinventory of what the family still possesses sometimes finds objects collected and stored before anyone understood their value. Today's trace vacuums and microparticle analysis can separate soil types, fibers, and organic residue at a level that would have been prohibitive in cost and sensitivity 30 years ago. As always, nothing is assumed. Items must be lawfully obtained, documented, and tested under current standards so their results, if useful, can be defended. Records have evolved, too. While Charlotte did not leave digital exhaust in the way a 2025 subject might, new databases can retrospectively stitch public-facing fragments, utility subscriber histories by address, employment registries, and open-source image sets that capture the neighborhood sightlines at different times of year. That sounds abstract until it helps fix a tree line or a fence height for March of 1994, answering whether a neighbor truly had, or didn't have, a view of the side path. Small answers close big arguments. If remains are ever located, modern identification is a different world. Low-template DNA, probabilistic genotyping, and kinship searches can establish identity from minimal bone or tooth material, provided recovery is lawful and chain of custody is intact. Genetic genealogy is not a button to push, it is a months-long legal and scientific process, guided by policy and court oversight. Used correctly, it links a name to a person with a margin of certainty that didn't exist when the file was opened. This case does not have remains. Saying what could happen if remains are recovered is not the same as saying they will be. There is also the human toolkit. Cold Case Review Boards standardize second looks. They reread statements, compare early versions to later retellings, and flag drift that matters. A witness who was unsure in 1994 may be firmer in 2025, not because memory gets better, but because life circumstances change. People retire. Kids grow up. A neighbor who kept quiet may be willing to sign a simple, factual statement now. In small communities, that shift can carry more force than any instrument. None of this bypasses the law. Without a body and without a declared scene, any invasive search still requires consent or probable cause. Every new test needs a clear evidentiary purpose, not curiosity. But the combination, a more sensitive lab, a non-destructive ground scan, a disciplined re-interview, has moved other nobody cases from open to charged. The value for Charlotte's family is not a promise, it's a plan that respects what is known and reduces what is guessed. Cases like this survive because communities don't let names fade. Precision serves families, but so does compassion. If you lived near that yard in March 1994 and remember even one practical detail, who shoveled which side path after the storm, who kept a spare key to the outbuilding, that detail still matters now. Cold cases do not sleep, they wait. In Girard, Ohio, the file on Charlotte Nagy Paulus has been reopened in cycles, 10 years, 20, 30, each pass asking the same practical question. Did anyone see or hear something small enough to dismiss in 1994 that matters now? Anniversaries aren't ceremony for investigators, they're leverage. Attention comes back to a case, and with it, the chance that someone who stayed quiet decides to talk. Local coverage has marked the milestones with consistency. The message from law enforcement has not changed. Missing mother of two, last verified inside her home the morning of March 12, 1994, no body recovered, investigation open. When cases drift into rumor, clarity is the first fix. A single sentence repeated year after year helps, the case remains active, and information still matters. Families live by that sentence. It keeps the door open without promising more than the file can support. Anniversaries also reset the outreach map. Detectives contact prior witnesses and broaden the net to people who moved away. Clerks, neighbors, extended relatives, anyone who touched the home, the yard, the routine, gets a fresh call. The tone is measured. This is a factual check, not an accusation. What time did you see the car that day? Which door did the family typically use? Did you ever notice anyone else with access to the outbuilding? In small towns, those are not casual questions, they are specific and respectful. The goal is not to manufacture memory but to surface one overlooked detail. Public records in later years add context but not resolution. There have been headlines about the husband in matters unrelated to Charlotte's disappearance. Those stories explain community suspicion, but they do not establish proof in this file. The investigator's posture reflects that distinction. The case documentation identifies him publicly as the only suspect. Prosecutors have not brought charges. Precision matters because the family deserves accuracy and because the law demands it. A cold case can be harmed by speculation as easily as it can be helped by a tip. By the 30th year, the outreach looks different. Social media posts carry the photo that has defined Charlotte for decades. The language is careful, missing since March 12, 1994, last seen at home, any information welcome. YouTube, local groups, and community boards circulate the same details with the same caveats. It is not the volume of shares that counts, it is the one person who recognizes the address, the side path, the shed, and connects it with a memory of a specific day. In cases like this, a name on a tip line is often less useful than a timestamp and a reason why you remember and what fixes the memory in place. There is a practical human angle to 30-year marks. Children become adults, neighbors retire, people relocate. A witness who avoided attention in 1994 may be more willing in 2025 to write down a simple account. People also clean out basements and garages. Objects kept from the 1990s, old keys, tools, tarps, surface. A second look at an item with a clear chain of custody can be more valuable today than it was on the day Charlotte vanished. The science has changed, the standards for how to test have, too. Through it all, the narrative is held to one line. Charlotte is missing. No remains have been found. The investigation names one person as the only suspect in public statements, and the case remains uncharged. That single ending is not neglect, it is discipline. The work here is to keep the clock straight, the geography tight, and the requests precise. If you lived on that street, worked the counter at the pharmacy, shoveled the side path, or held a spare key in March 1994, an ordinary memory could be the hinge this file has lacked. No body cases move when the provable pieces align. In Charlotte Nagy-Paulus's file, those pieces are set, last verified inside her Girard, Ohio home in the early hours of March 12, 1994, a narrow window of opportunity. No post-event life signals and money, medicine, mail, ID, or phone, an exterior lead documented but never upgraded to a crime scene, and public statements over the years identifying her husband, Paul Paulus, as the only suspect, without a charge. That is the legal reality, and it remains the reality today. To end this series cleanly, we hold to one outcome and look at one way forward. Prosecutors who advance no-body cases don't invent scenes or lean on rumor. They stack small, testable facts until the gap is too small to ignore. For lanes typically carry the load, a time-bounded window that excludes most people, trace that is inconsistent with a voluntary departure, statement analysis that catches specific claims breaking against records, and post-event behavior that signals foreknowledge. Applied here, without adding facts, 3 lanes are scaffolded, the window is defined, the life signal board is flat, public statements and later re-interviews can still be compared line by line for drift. The 4th lane depends on findings the file does not publicly show. That's why this case has stayed open. Modern cold case work can press those lanes without changing the story. Lawful ground scans of the yard answer a narrow question: is there a buried target worth a warranted dig? A careful, consensual reinventory of stored household items from the 1990s can surface microtrace that wasn't measurable then. Historical sightline checks fix what a neighbor truly could see along the side path that March. If remains are ever recovered, today's identification methods can do what 1994 could not. None of that declares a solution. It reduces the guesswork until either a charge or a new lead becomes responsible. The human side is straight. Charlotte was 28 and a mother of 2. Families living with unsolved cases do not need drama, they need accuracy, persistence, and a clear ask. If you lived near that address in March 1994 and can anchor one practical detail to time, who held a spare key to the outbuilding, which door was commonly used, when a vehicle idled where it usually didn't, write it down and report it. Ordinary facts, fixed to a clock, move cold files more than opinions ever will. There is only one ending on record as of November 12, 2025, Charlotte is missing, no body has been found, no charge has been filed. The point of telling this story in sequence was not to manufacture a second ending. It was to keep the timeline clean, separate observation from conclusion, and show where lawful tools and honest memories still matter. When a community keeps a name current and an agency keeps a file active, the next fact is usually small and enough. I'm closing this case file with one lesson: truth survives pressure. Charlotte's name reminds me that small facts, time, doors, keys, can outlast silence. If you're living with fear or control, tell someone early. If you saw something ordinary in 1994, write it down today. Justice in America moves when regular people speak clearly. Did this story change how you see nobody cases? What detail would you check first, and why? If this video reached you, drop a comment with where you're watching from, or why it didn't work for you. And if you value this work, please subscribe to follow the next case.